I want to welcome Agile XRM to the podcast. I've known the people at Agile XRM for the past 12 years. I've seen how their business process management tool can add massive value to complex organizational processes in sectors such as finance and government. If you have complex processes or a need for dialogues on the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, take a look at how this BPM tool can add value. You can find them at agilexrm.com or check out the show notes for more details. Welcome to the MVP Show. My intention is that you listen to the stories of these MVP guests and are inspired to become an MVP and bring value to the world through your skills. If you have not checked it out already, I do a YouTube series called How to Become an MVP. The link is in the show notes. With that, let's get on with the show. Today's guest is from Orlando in the US of A. He works at Hitachi Solutions America as a solution architect. He has been awarded as MVP first in 2022. He has over 10 years of experience supporting business objectives through information technology. He's a co-organizer of the Power Platform School in the US. You can find links to his bio and anything we cover that's worth clicking through to in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to the show, William.
Thank you for having me.
Good, man. Good. It's good to crank into this. What the listeners won't know, of course, that we just had a bit of banter off air as you passed on the regards of Mr. Ben Vollmer to me and his dodgy questions that he, of course, is well known for.
Yeah, he's good at that.
He's good at that. Excellent. Well, let's get to know you. Tell us about family, food, and fun.
Oh, man, my family. So I got married about 6 years ago, and that changed my life. I have two wonderful, amazing kids. They're almost grown now, but they were babies when my wife and I started really, I could say, courting. And, oh, man, they have been my world. So I got a lot of family members, a lot of cousins, and so we are happy to add more to the family. For fun, I am so simple. I love to read and study more about tech and, quite frankly, chill out, try to hit a couple golf balls every now and then. And I'm a big guy, man. So anything food related, I'm all for, man. I love good old barbecue, man. And anything else I'll eat. I love food, man. So definitely.
So good. So good. What you talk about reading, what type of books are you into? Any particular genre?
Right now, it's everything technology. And you know what, believe it or not, the Dummy series has a couple of good articles, and a couple of good books about customer service. So as things on the platform tend to shift more, it's always good to brush up on some customer service facts. And actually an older book too, still very viable. It's about automating your sales force. It was written back in the early 90s. It's funny to hear about technology like floppy disks, but the fundamentals and foundations and the principles of the book still hold true today. So it just shows you that even though this stuff was written almost 20, 30 years ago, companies still have some difficulties, implementing some of this technology or following through on some really good principles. So
it's cool, man. It's cool. I've just been reading a book of Hugo, a guy in he's in Europe, and he's written a book called The Power Platform Solution Architect's Handbook. And I've seen a lot of books come and go in the in our area of business applications, and there's been books that I've read and I feel like they're almost like a copy of Microsoft Learn. It's like features, of the product, like you can do this, you can do that. But this guy's book, it really unpacks the whole Power Platform journey, things you got to consider, things you got to and it's like you can tell the author is writing from experience rather than book learned and just put another book out, And so, yeah, really, really good book. I'll get him on the podcast sometime. Tell me how did you get into tech? What was that journey for you?
Oh man, yeah, we got time. So my journey into tech started when I was a young man. My uncle actually wrote helped program the electrical system that the state of Florida uses now for the electrical grids. And so as a young man, I used to go to his house because he also built old computers. So I'm never going to give you dates because I'm not going to show how old I am. Um, but he used to build computers, and I would go in, and I'd mess up his entire system or setup, and then I would get yelled at. And then, so in order for me not to get beat, I had to memorize how to put things back together so he wouldn't know. He was kind of a bit OCD, so he would always know, but he wouldn't get mad as long as it worked. so basically, it was basically a matter of survival if I got something right or wrong. I started coding at 13 with Basic A. I guess I dated myself a little bit back there. And then I started, coincidentally, my high school signed a deal with Cisco. So they taught Cisco classes in high school. Now, I was just a dumb kid. I signed up for it. A couple other guys that I still communicate with today, we signed up for it. Shout out to Ryan Massfeller and Frank Diaz. And we joined the academy, and we learned how to program or configure routers and switches. NT was just out, so we also worked on the system admin side, and we did stuff for the school. It was free labor. So then I went into college, got my degree, went up to DC, started consulting, and haven't looked back. I did shift into business apps though I ran into CRM about 10 years ago, and I took a course like some others because we needed to build a system for the company that we were working for. So it was basically a case auditing system for preventative maintenance or preventative measures. So my relationship with Ben took it as something he told me to do it like 15 years ago, but I didn't listen. So for 5 years, I completely ignored the guy about this. So finally I was like, hey, I need to build a system that can track cases and we can, act on them. What do I do? And he's like, dude, check out Dynamics finally. And so we did that. So I took a course, implemented it, and I fell in love with it. And I haven't looked back since. Finally went full-time consulting business apps for about a little 5.5 years now. So started from in-house and then went full-time consulting. So been consulting before with systems admin, network engineering, and then finally did business apps. And so I was a director of IT at my previous, 2 employers ago. But started working my way back up, man. So it's been a great journey. But it's still technology because I thoroughly enjoy working with the tech. So it's all about tech.
So if we look at the product suite that Microsoft has under business apps, and there's I think there's around 30 plus different applications in that suite now. It's so large. What are kind of your go-to? What do you kind of have the most knowledge around in that tech space?
Man, it's going to be field service and universal resource scheduling. Scheduling for me has always been, it's just been my bread and butter. Field service is something interesting enough, field service was the first, I would say, business process that I was able to really grasp. Sales is so ambiguous in so many ways. Customer service is customer service, right? But field service was, from a larger business perspective, something that I was able to, I was interested in, and it just grew. So dispatching work orders, preventative maintenance, that was easy, but then scheduling. And so when they said you could schedule anything with URS, that tickled my ears. So you'll tend to hear me talk more or less about scheduling, getting available resource times, or anything related to field service. I do love all the offerings in the Power Platform, but when we talk about Dynamics, yeah, those are my 2 go-to, man.
So resource scheduling, which is, it's a big thing in its own right, as you say. Give me a couple of use cases that you've done that didn't involve field service.
Oh, simple. Oh, goodness gracious, easy. So one was for, I don't want to get in trouble for any NDA. One was
No, don't
for,
say the company names, just
yeah,
the
no
industry
company
type.
names. One was for financial industry. They were actually scheduling people to come visit their appointments for their branches. So this is just when COVID hit. This was just when COVID hit. So that was a big deal. And they already had the licensing, right? So they just needed to learn how to kind of use the scheduling, the resource availability module. I'm sorry, API. Also, too, this one was a U.S. retailer. They had appointments that needed to be booked for their technicians. So this is when I fell in love with this one because this one involved the portal. So we used, I don't want to give out too much detail, but we used a very popular control to display those availabilities, and we built a web service and pinged directly off of the again, resource availability API. So search resource availability API. So those are two and other healthcare ones that were similar. But if you really look at it, they tend to have the same case. You know, who is available? When can they get there? Right? It's who, what, when, where. And how do we answer that with scheduling? And so realistically, it just gets down to when you get down to nitty gritty, it's just how do you want to present that to the customer, right? Scheduling anything is URS is a phenomenal tool. I think it's underutilized, but when you need it, you know exactly where to go, and it's there.
Your use case there was quite interesting because my next question was, because I just hadn't thought about it until I was talking to you, was the use case around where somebody self-selects their scheduling. So I take it in your portal scenario there, they could log in, they could see the available appointment slots that they could take, not from an individual's perspective, but from the resource schedule, that's a powerful story right there. And that would impact a lot of companies.
So it was lead generation. So they would enter in their details. We would capture that lead information. And then they would need you have to structure, because it's data driven, right? So we had to structure territories by zip codes and align their bookable resources accordingly. But it was interesting that, one of the biggest problems we had was making sure that those available time slots were visible. Now, this is right before they exposed the API. So you still had that challenge, and I'm not going to pretend to say Andy's last name, but he knows who he is. He's another MVP. I won't dare pretend to say his last name because I always mess it up. But
Payajan.
There you go. I'm sorry, folks.
Right?
I'm a Southern American. I will mess that up. Apologies, Auntie. He created a Power Automate that would, put those bookings into Outlook calendars. And so I just used Graph API and kind of reversed the process. So we had kind of like a bi-directional sync going on. And so you could also leverage different Azure offerings if you needed some sort of database to kind of track any change logs. So for me, I used it as a tool to talk about in some of my MVP sessions. And then you get to use some of those, like I said, beefy offerings. So we went overboard with Cosmos, but we didn't do that for the client. I did that for me just to show that how flexible it is. But really, man, that use case, it was a huge use case, and getting that kind of bidirectional sync, that availability that was present there with Power Automate was incredibly helpful. So we were very pleased at what we built, incredibly pleased at what we built, and the ROI was huge. So that's all I'm going to say.
Do you know much about licensing? The scheduler?
With what?
I didn't know if you can license it outside of a field service license. Can you?
For what?
Isn't there a standalone license for? Yeah.
You can schedule anything. URS comes with everything CE. So
No, but can you get a license for scheduling only without getting field service?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I need to look at that.
Because I always thought, and I don't know why I thought this, I always thought they were going to license it independent, right? Because there's a ton of use cases, just like we've covered today, that have nothing to do with people going out from an organization to the field, right? Which is your field service and your connected field service. But there's definitely a heap of use cases which are resource scheduling, like you've given, in the financial sector, in retail, in healthcare. I'm seeing it a heck of a lot. Yeah.
Huge for healthcare. It's the lifeblood for a couple of deployments that we made for a couple of healthcare industry, a couple of healthcare organizations. But it's huge, especially with COVID. There was one for vaccine scheduling that was done. Huge. But that's a good question. I need to look at that. I just thought it was always available. Well, I know it's always available, everything CE, but it's such a powerful tool.
I just think there's many use cases where you could just use that standalone but I don't know, as in if it's the same price as field service, who cares? It's irrelevant. Tell me about what you found in coming into the MVP program.
Oh, I hope I don't get in trouble. So here's the funny thing. I wasn't trying to reach out to be an MVP. So I was very quiet in that area. And if it wasn't for, I'm going to say Trisha Sinclair and Dion for yelling at me. Like Trisha yelled at me the first time. She encouraged me. I'm sorry, not yell. Trisha was incredibly encouraging. Awesome, right? Yeah, Trish is amazing. And then she got Dion on the horn, like literally called, and Dion's like, dude, tell your story. Who cares? It was already written. Do it again. And even before that, Julie Yak, I met her at D365 Extreme in Portugal. And she put me on a hackathon with a bunch of folks. So shout out to Julie. All these folks that I didn't necessarily know what an MVP was until probably 2021. And, they were always so helpful and reassuring, because when you're putting your stuff out there, especially when you're writing a blog, that's a form of art. That's a form of self-expression, and you're worried about being judged, right? You're worried about what people are going to think. Are they going to say this guy's stupid? What does this guy know? All these things run through your head. And so these folks in the MVP community were kind of like, hey, nobody cares. Trust us. And, they encouraged me to put myself out there. And so I did. And the first time I was so nerve wracking. I did it was a session, and it was about URS actually. URS, Universal Resourcing Scheduling at Scale. It's my first session. And I was so nervous. I was glued to my notes, and I'm kind of like just reading and shaking. And I'm not going to say who this person is, but they were like, just be yourself. Just be yourself. And so that was incredibly helpful, because that took the pressure from up here to down here. And then you realize that some folks in the community are just incredibly warm and welcoming and kind. And honestly, they like the same thing you do. They just like talking about the tech. So eventually, after a few years of writing and getting myself out there, I got the nomination and got the nod. But really, my favorite part of that journey was the Power Platform School. Because I don't know if we're going to talk about that now, but
we're going to talk about that now. So tell us about, a lot of people won't know what the Power Platform School is, and of course we'll put links to the show notes. If I remember right, Trisha kicked it off right in the UK. By the way, she can recommend some great rum. I've had some great rum from Trisha's recommendation. In fact, she might even got me a bottle. I can't even remember. She might have.
She got you a bottle? She's never gotten me a bottle. Yeah. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah,
I want that on the podcast.
I used to live in London, so that's where I met her. In fact, I think I met her first at Scottish Summit, the very first Scottish Summit that ran, and I met her parents as well there. But tell us about the school.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So shortly after I'm writing things out, it's interesting. Mark Christie was talking about making changes, him and Ian, and Mark's a real good guy. And it got me thinking. I'm like, hey, how do I kind of improve diversity within this space? coming from, again, the networking side, it's very rare that you see African-American males or women, or non-binary individuals. Very rare. It's even more rare in the business app space. And so, I was like, how can we extend this opportunity to other folks in the community? That's what I started thinking about. And I was spitballing with Trish, and I think Trish was kind of like preparing me to jump in the US side. She just wasn't telling me. But I said, hey, this was bothering me, Trish. I'm like, I just want to see a difference. I mean, I would go on site and I'm the only guy, a person of color. I would look at our org charts, my employers, and I would see that I'm the only one in an entire regional space. And that to me is a problem. I think that companies don't necessarily know where to go to get people, or folks aren't aware of the opportunities that are present. But anyway, Trish said, hey, we ran this in the UK. Would you like to run it in the US or help run it in the US? And I'm sure. Tell me what I need to do. And so that's how it started. She gathered up a couple of good folks. I'm going to say a couple at first, right? A couple of good folks at first, and then it blew up to the team that we have now. So we had our first iteration in the US about 3 years ago, and it was a lot. It was a lot, but it was so well. Couple of folks from the US side that were ready to go. They got hired. And then we had our second class, and that entire class, I'm going to say about 90% of that class got hired. And now we're on our third session. So I just spent the entire day doing model driven apps in a day. So still very involved with every aspect of the school, whether it's mentoring, whether it's coordinating events, whether it's the hackathons. It's a very wonderful process and a way for us to give back. And I got to say this, we've gotten absolute amazing amount of support from our sponsors. Did not expect to see, hey, that kind of response, and everyone being so eager and willing to participate, not just in our regular community, but also in the MVP community and even in the partner channel. I work for Hitachi Solutions, love it, but I still communicate with our other partners and with other partners. And they were like, hey, how can we help and who can we hire? That just blew my mind. I did not expect to see such a positive response from these partners. So it's a great program, and I love everything about it that we've been doing.
That is so epic. I know we're at time, and there's so many other questions I want to ask. Maybe we need to do a podcast with you and Trisha and get the 3-year update on how this is going in its own right? To see,
I'm all for it, man.
The impact, we'll do that on the Power Platform show, I think. William, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it, man. Wish you the best.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If you like the show and want to be a supporter, check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. Thanks again, and see you next time.